Why did the programmer start looking for another job? Because she didn't get a raise! I cannot believe how much of a disappointment I am sometimes. Okay, hello all you crazy people out there. My name is Michael. I like wizards, dragons, and making games. And let's talk about a raise. So a long time ago, back in the ancient history days of 2014, I made a series of videos about GameMaker, about the different data structures you can use. And, well, let's just say those videos were made in 2014, and they were made in, I think, like GameMaker 8, and a lot of stuff has changed since then. And I want to start remaking those videos. I know that arrays aren't what usually people might think of when they think about data structures in GameMaker, but they are a way that you can structure your data. And in any case, they are a sort of a starting point for a lot of the other data structures in GameMaker. So let's talk about them. So in GameMaker, you can have variables. You're probably familiar with variables. This is one of the foundational concepts in computer programming. So you can have a variable that goes something like player name. You can assign to it, I need a name. First name Mario, last name Mario. And you can store values in that variable using the equal sign, using the equals assignment. You can retrieve that value. Sometimes you may not actually want to store just a single value inside a variable. Sometimes you may want to store a series of values or a collection of values inside a single variable. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. The one that I am going to be talking about today is going to be the humble array. Arrays allow you to store a list of values in sequence. There are numbered lists. So the first value in your array could be the name Mario. The second value in the array could be the name Luigi Mario. The third value in your array could be Princess Toadstool. The list goes on. So there are a couple different ways that you can create an array in GameMaker, and probably the easiest one is one that did not actually get added to the GameMaker language until depressingly recently, and that is what is known as an array literal. And array literals are just a series of, well, not a series of square brackets. You would just type square brackets like this, and you can add whatever you want between them. And you can separate each value that you want to have in the array, first name Luigi, last name Mario, with a comma. And in my case, I'm inputting strings for like character names. First name Princess, last name Toadstool. I'm just looking at the Super Mario poster on my wall and trying to think of the names of other characters who appear in them. Does Bowser actually have a last name? First name Bowser, middle name The, last name Koopa. Anyway, this creates an array. There are 4 elements in the array. The first element is Mario. The second element is Luigi Mario. The third element is Princess Toadstool. And the fourth element is Bowser the Koopa. All 4 of these values are now going to be contained inside the array, which is player name. And now when I try to show message the player name variable, we are going to see that it contains not a single string, not a single value, but it's going to contain all 4 values. And it's actually going to be printed out pretty much exactly in the show message function, the same as I typed it in, including the square brackets. If it makes it easier for you to read your own code, you can always separate these onto multiple lines, because GameMaker language does not care terribly much about having extra lines in your code, as long as it can still understand it. So if I were to format it like this to make it look a little bit more like a list, it would still contain the same information. Very nice. So this is the array itself. This is the contents of the array itself. If you want to actually access something that's in the array without just accessing the array as a whole, you can always use, once again, square brackets after the variable name. And now when I try to show message the array, I can specify an index in the array, which let's just say 1. Let's go for the first index. And this is going to, instead of showing us the entire array when I say show message, it is going to show us whatever value is stored at index 1. And you can place your bets on what you think is going to show up when I do that. And we will see that when I run the game, the value that is stored at index 1 when I try to access it is not, in fact, the first element in the array, but it is going to be the second element in the array, Luigi Mario. And this might seem a little bit surprising at first if you've never considered how computers store information before. And that is that arrays, and a lot of other things in computers, are what is known as indexed from 0. That means that instead of the first element in the array being found at index 1, the first element in the array is going to actually be found at index 0. The second element in the array, instead of being found at index 2, is actually going to be found at index 1, so on and so forth. If I were to, for example, show message player name at index 0, then if I were to run the game, you would see that we do indeed have Mario, instead of the green guy who occasionally hangs out with him. If I were to try to show message player name at index 3, instead of showing us Princess Toadstool, we would see instead the big old turtle guy who's constantly trying to kidnap her. Anyway, 0 indexing. This is a fairly common thing for people to forget about arrays, especially when they're first starting out.
Hey.
A fairly common mistake for people to make would be if they have an array that is 4 elements long, like this one, and they try to access the 4th element in the array with, instead of putting 3 between the square brackets at the end of the array name, if you were to try to instead put a 4 in square brackets at the end of the array name, this will cause your code to break. And this will tell you that instead of having a value there, we have an execution error, variable index 4 out of range of 4 in the variable player name. At first glance, it might look like nothing's wrong. Variable index 4 out of range of 4 sounds like that should be valid. But you do have to remember that the maximum index in the array that you are allowed to access is going to be 1 less than the array's actual size. So if you have an array that's 4 elements long, the maximum index that you're going to be allowed to access with the square brackets without GameMaker complaining is going to be at index number 3. If you have an array that's 100 elements long, the maximum index that you're going to be allowed to access without GameMaker complaining is going to be number 99. You can use the same square brackets notation like this in order to set a value in the array. So in case you wanted to replace the party member at index 1 in the array, sorry Luigi fans, you could say player name at index 1 is going to be, who's another character? Toadsworth. He hasn't appeared in a game in a while, has he? I don't think he's been in a game since Sunshine. Anyway, now if we were to look at the name at position 1 in the array, we would see that it is indeed Toadsworth, and it's no longer Luigi. If we were to look at the contents of the array as a whole, we would see that we have Mario, Toadsworth, the princess, and then Bowser. Don't ask what happened to Luigi. With this in mind, you can kind of create your entire array this way. You don't have to use the array literals. You don't have to use the square brackets like this to create your array. You can simply say player name index 0 is going to be Mario. Player name index 1 is what we just said. Index 2 is going to be Princess Toadstool. And Bowser the Koopa. As soon as you use the square brackets at the end of a variable name like this, GameMaker will know that you're trying to create an array, or at least it will assume that you're trying to create an array. If you did that as a mistake, GameMaker would have no idea. And you can simply create an array like this. Back in the day, in ancient history, GameMaker, all variables in GML were technically arrays, and if you didn't use the square brackets like this, it would just assume that you wanted the index 0 in the array, and it was kind of a mess. And it makes me wonder how we survived for so long with the language working like that. But if that sounds a little bit ridiculous to you, don't worry, it changed a long time ago. Also, you know what? Just to keep the linguists happy, since this is no longer a single name being stored in this array, let's make this player names plural instead of just player name. The third way that you can create an array, and this is the most general one in a lot of ways, is using a function called array create. And this takes 2 parameters. One is a size, so we can just tell it to create an array of size 4. And it takes an optional parameter, which is the default value. If you do not specify a default value, the default value that the array will be created with is going to be just 0. So when we say or create size 4, we are going to see 4 zeros in the array. All right, that's what it's initialized to. You can specify a default value. It can be another number. You can create an array that's initialized to all 10s. You can make it a string. You can specify a name of some sort, a default name. So if we do this, we will, no thank you. We will instead have an array that is just Koopa repeated 4 times like this. Okay, that's fine. The array create function is useful if you want an array but you don't have any particular value that you want to initialize it to. You don't have any value that you want to put in it. Maybe you want the player to input something into it later, at a later time, at a later point in time, or something like that. I suppose you might call a third and a half way that you can create an array in GameMaker is instead of specifying index 0 when you create yourself a variable, like I did up here, you can specify any index in the array. And GameMaker will decide that you want an array and that it should be big enough to contain whatever you're trying to put in it. So if I say player names index 3 is going to equal something, GameMaker will create an array that is 4 elements long, and the first 3 will be initialized to 0. And the 4th one will be whatever I told it to be, so Bowser the Koopa in this case. That's another valid way to do it. I prefer to use the array create function if I need to create an array of a specific size, because it's a little bit more clear what the code is doing, and it's a little bit more clear to you as the programmer when you're reading the code that you want an array. Next, aside from the array create function, there are a series of handy other functions for dealing with an arrays. And if you type array followed by an underscore in the GameMaker code editor, you can see a list of them. You have array create, which, as I said, is for initializing an array. Array get is very much the same thing. If I can type it out correctly, array get is very much the same thing as just using the square bracket notation. So these two statements would produce the same answer. They would produce the same result. Likewise, array set. Captain Toad is another name. That's an old favorite. Array set would work very similarly to simply assigning a value to a position in an array using the equal sign. I think when a GameMaker compiles your game, it would actually generate the exact same code for both array set and just using a regular assignment. So on a technical level inside the computer, there shouldn't be any difference inside the computer between these two lines. Anyway, you also have array length, which is pretty handy for getting the length of the array. If I were to show a message box containing the length of the array, we are going to see that we have a length of 4 in this array. And once again, arrays are indexed from 0. So if you have an array that is of length 4, the biggest index that you will be able to use is going to be 3. Okay, some other handy functions. If you want to append a value onto an array that already exists, you can use array push. This is... I know some people are going to get mad at me both if I say this and if I don't say this. The array push function is for adding a value onto the end of an array. So if I were to player name, I'll just go with Captain Toad again. And if we were to show the message of the length of the array, we would see that it is now 5 up from 4. And if I were to try to access the value at index 4 inside the array, we would see that we now have Captain Toad on the end there. I should warn you, the array push function can be somewhat slow because the way that arrays work inside the computer is that they are stored in in sequence in memory. If you want to add a value onto the end of an array like this, what the computer has to do is it has to create a new array in memory that is of the correct size, and it has to copy the contents of the old array to the new one, and that one, if you do it too often, can take a long time. If you just do it once in a while, it's not going to be that bad. Obviously, you saw when I just ran the game right now, it worked pretty much instantly. But if you foresee yourself in the future having to append values onto the end of an array like this frequently, then you may want to either initialize your array to a bigger size to begin with, or you may want to use another data structure, like a DS list. And the same applies if you were to, instead of saying array push, if you were to say array player names of index 4. This is going to produce the same result. It's going to work basically the same way inside the computer as array push does. We are trying to insert a value into index 4 in the array, which is bigger than the array actually is. And unlike when we try to read a value in an array that does not exist, this is allowed, and this is just going to do the same thing. This is going to resize the array. So again, we have an array of length 5, and the last element, the element at position 4, is going to be Captain Toad. If you do want to resize your own array on purpose, you may have seen this earlier. You may have seen array resize earlier when I was scrolling through the list of values. You can resize your own array. This is going to work like array create, or at least similarly to array create. It's going to take the array that you want to resize, and it's going to take the new size. If the new size is smaller than the size of the array currently, the elements at the end will be chopped off. If the new size is greater than the size of the array currently, then any additional elements in the array will just be initialized to 0. Other handy functions, if you want to alphabetize an array, or if you want to otherwise put an array in order, you have array sort. This is a relatively recent addition to GameMaker. This was only added, I think, last year. You have player names. You can pass the player names array to the function, and it's going to take a second parameter. This is going to be sort type or function. To keep it simple, you can just make this a true or false value, and you can just let it do its thing. I'm going to print out. I'm going to show the contents of the entire array again, and there's still 4 Koopas in there. I want to put another list of names in order. So let's run that again with the array being with the array containing this contents: Mario, Toadsworth, Toadstool, and Bowser, and then Captain Toad coming along at the end. So this is going to put the array in alphabetical order. This is useful if you want to alphabetize a list of names. So you have Bowser the Koopa, Captain Toad, Mario, Princess Peach, same character, Toadsworth. If you instead had an array of numbers, they would be sorted in order, ascending order. It's nice to be able to do that sometimes. If instead of passing the true parameter to this to the sort type or function argument in array sort, you would get reverse alphabetical order, or if there were a series of numbers, you would get them in descending order. So we see that Toadsworth comes first in the way this array is sorted, and Bowser the Koopa comes last because reverse alphabetical order. You can, if you want, specify your own sorting function to this array sort function, and that will allow you to sort an array in a custom order, but that is beyond the scope of this video. For now, if you just want to put something in alphabetical order, if you want to otherwise sort a list, use true if you want it in ascending order, or false if you want it in reverse. There are a handful of other array functions that you can use in GameMaker. You have array copy, which is for copying the contents of one array to another array. You have array delete, which is for removing a value at some index in an array. Array equals is for deciding if the contents of 2 arrays are the same. You can't simply use the equals operator when you are trying to compare the contents of arrays, because instead this will just compare whether or not the arrays reference the same location in memory, and it won't consider whether their contents are the same. Don't use equals. What are some of the other ones? You have array pop, which is the opposite of array push. Array pop will remove the last element in an array and discard it. It's sometimes helpful to be able to do that. And array insert is for inserting an element in the middle of an array, rather than the end. And down here at the bottom, there are a couple of obsolete functions. There are a couple of removed functions that were for dealing with arrays in the past that are no longer needed due to some changes in the ways that they work internally. Which brings up the point that you can store whatever you want inside an array, and that does include other arrays. So I'm just gonna get rid of some of the commented out code here. You can store arrays inside arrays. You could, for example, inside position 4 in this array, you could store an array yourself, and this could be something like first name Captain, last name Toad, and then you can sorting this doesn't really make any sense anymore. You could show the contents of the array directly, and you're going to see that we now have a couple names, and on the end there is going to be another array in square brackets, Captain Toad. And if you wanted to, you could access the element at position 4, and you could see that this is instead of being a single name, it's once again another array. contained within square brackets Captain Toad, and you could say something like first name, player names, index 4, and then from there, index 0, and then last name, player names, index 4, and then followed by that index 1. And that is going to chain these array accesses together, and that is going to allow you to get the individual elements in the subarrays. And you can do this, you can go as deep with this as you want. First name Captain, last name Toad. If you want each of these sub-elements to contain instead of strings arrays themselves, you're perfectly allowed to do that. That is another somewhat recent addition that that Yo-Yo Games made to GameMaker that is quite nice to have, because accessing nested arrays like this in the past was rather tedious. Anyway, the last thing that I want to do is that something that you'll find yourself doing fairly often is looping over an array, and I'm going to make this just a regular string now instead of a subarray. You may want to loop over the contents of an array. You can, if you want to, say, create a for loop. And you can initialize your loop counter to, for example, 0. And you can make the update condition in your loop if the index, if I is less than the length of the array. And then at the end, you can say I plus plus. You can increment the loop counter, or if you prefer, I plus equals 1. That sort of thing. And you can access the values inside this array in a loop using the loop counter using the variable I, which is going to get bigger from 0 to the length of the array. You can show message this value, and this is going to show a little message box with the names of every character name inside this array. So we have Mario, Toadsworth, Princess Toadstool, Bowser the Koopa, and Captain Toad. And this allows you to access all of the elements in the array without having to specify each one yourself. Once again, because this is important, do mind the bounds of the array. So if you want to iterate over every single element in the array, you're going to want to start I at 0 and say I is less than the length of the array. But if you were to instead try to say I is less than or equal to the length of the array, then when we get to the last element, we are going to have the game crashing on us, because we are going to be once again trying to access something that is not part of the array. So we have the game breaking on us with basically the same error message that we saw before. Don't do that. Okay. That should be it for the basics. There are other more complicated things you can do with arrays. For example, arrays behave in interesting ways sometimes when you try to pass them as parameters to scripts. But that is very much a story for another day. As I said at the beginning, I'm planning on making this the first part in a sort of revisited series to the different data structures that you can find in GameMaker. Those being the DS list, the queue, the priority queue, the stack, the grid, and the map. Those are all different ways of structuring data. I also frequently talk about more complicated stuff, like making 3D games in GameMaker. That's a lot of fun. And then on the side, I'm also actually making a game, which is in a lot of ways putting the separate ideas in these tutorial videos into practice. It's a lot of fun. At least I think it is. I know I said in the not-so-distant past that I was hoping to have a series on 3D collisions in GameMaker ready to go by approximately now, but there have been some setbacks in the form of computer emergencies, and I'm kind of crunched for time, and I have deadlines for videos to meet, so we'll be rolling with this for now. Hopefully I'll be able to get back to that soon, but I just wanted to say something so that people know that I haven't just given up on the idea of that series yet, or anything. Anyway, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games. I promise the stupid joke at the beginning of this video isn't, like, a regular feature of this channel. Seriously. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute towards these videos being made, there will be links to that in all the usual places. Otherwise, I hope you all found that useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Kiara Elizabeth, Connor, David Key, Edward Holt, Emily Koyo, Gregory, Posho, Tusk, and Zenith for supporting these videos. If you want to see your name in the credits or to hear yourself shouted out at the end here, head on over to the Patreon page in the video description to join the fun.